Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy McDonald, Director of City Space. Thank you for joining us for the first in our year-long monthly series, This Changes Everything, where we examine the many ways that the pandemic has changed our lives. And tonight we're going to talk about the future of the office. This subject is so timely right now as restrictions lift and vaccinations multiply, and the return to the office is imminent for so many of us. Before we get to the panel discussion, I'd like to pass to our supporter tonight at Code 42 and introduce JD Hansen, Code 42's Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer. Code 42's commitment to collaborative work makes them a natural supporter of tonight's discussion. I pass it to you, JD.
Thank you, Amy. Code 42 is really excited to be part of the WBUR City Space and super excited to sponsor this kickoff event. The panelists were just talking before this, and you guys are in for an amazing discussion. This last year, more than any other, has challenged the business world to focus on resiliency and adaptability. The way we work, collaborate, innovate, and the way we secure that work will really never be the same. Over the past few years, many organizations have embraced this digital transformation to accelerate growth, foster innovation, and drive productivity. The rush to remote work during the pandemic was a force accelerator, and our data shows that digital transformation jumped from more than 5 years in just the early few months of the pandemic, and there's no real indication that this trajectory is slowing down. At Code 42, we're deeply invested in digital transformation. Recently, we've been very focused on the ramifications of the pandemic from a cybersecurity perspective. Our data has showed us that employees are 85% more likely to leak data today than they were before the pandemic. This is due to all sorts of macro factors such as employee turnover, rush to implement collaboration technology without proper security, or simple careless mistakes due to more distractions in an at-home environment. The new remote and hybrid work is here to stay, and the way we work will never really be the same. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion. It's a really great opportunity to take a step back, talk about what companies can do to adapt and really thrive in this new world. So with that, Amy, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, JD, again. And now let's start our conversation with WBUR reporter Callum Borchers, who will be our moderator tonight.
Thanks, Amy, and good evening, everybody. We really have assembled a terrific panel that I'm excited to introduce in just a moment. But first, just a few housekeeping items. We are streaming live on the WBUR City Space YouTube channel, and so if you haven't already, we'd encourage you to subscribe so we can notify you whenever we go live with great events like this one. And one of the hallmarks of these City Space forums is interaction. We want them to feel a bit like some of our call-in radio shows where you can participate. And so tonight, that means asking questions on slido.com. That's SLIDO.com. Use the hashtag #ThisChangesEverything. Again, that's #ThisChangesEverything. And your questions will come in to me and the City Space team, and we'll get to as many as we can in the hour that we have together. And now to our panelists. We are joined tonight by Tsedal Neeley. She's a professor of business administration at Harvard Business School. And very fittingly, her new book is called Remote Work Revolution, Succeeding from Anywhere. Welcome, Tsedal.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also with us is Meena Krenek. She's a principal and interior design director at the architecture firm Perkins&Will. And she's brought along some design ideas that can help us picture what our workspaces might look like in the not too distant future. So we're looking forward to that. And Meena, we're very glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And finally, we are joined by the Boston Globe technology columnist Hiawatha Bray. I have to say his reporting on subjects like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and internet access has become more indispensable than ever in the past year. And he is one of the most thoughtful people that I know when it comes to technology's impact on our lives. So Hiawatha, welcome to you.
I'm glad to be here.
We're going to talk tonight about how a global pandemic changes office life, and there are surely more changes to come. But I think we ought to start with some of the notable changes that we have already seen. Hiawatha, I'm going to come to you first. And for those who don't know, Hiawatha and I used to sit close by each other in the old Globe newsroom on Morrissey Boulevard. And he was famous in the business section for the humorous and creative ways in which he fielded phone calls from PR folks with bad pitches. So Hiawatha, I'm sure your colleagues have missed overhearing your half of those conversations since last March. But what else has changed about office life in your view?
Well, I have mellowed. I have really. I try to be nicer to people. But in any case, I think we all know what's changed. The thing that I want to emphasize when we look at all this is that, in a sense, not as much has changed as we think, because practically everything that is happening that was sped up by the pandemic was stuff that was already happening to a greater or lesser degree already. I mean, you were already going to offices that were using a lot of these hybrid work principles. Like you go to a place like a PTC over on the seaport, and they already had the deal set up where nobody had a fixed desk, and you only came in a certain number of days every week, and you would look at a map to see where you could sit that day when you came in. That was stuff that they were doing years before the pandemic. And we're journalists is another example. The newspaper business for the last century has worked on the principle that you shouldn't be in the office. You should be out getting news. And so journalists have always worked away from the office. This is simply nothing new. What's happening, of course, is that a huge concentrated slug of it is now being injected into our lives. And fortunately, we have the technology to support it for those of us who work behind desks. But even so, we're still trying to learn the dimensions of it. How much of this is going to continue? How many of us are going to keep working at home? To what extent do we work at home? Other things that have come up during this whole transition that are so interesting, like, for example, the rise of surveillance technologies that the workplace is often using to keep tabs on their workers. I was blowing that off and not really thinking it was a big deal. I was just reading yesterday, however, and a huge proportion of American companies are adopting software to make sure that their workers are actually at home working. I was shocked by how popular that is. And that's going to change the relationship between us and our employers in some very striking ways. And I don't know how that's going to work out. But I think a lot of what we're hearing about the office of the future, personally, I'm sort of vaguely skeptical about it. Not that we're not going to see a lot of this stuff in terms of the new features of the office, like touchless technology in the office and health testing for people coming to work. I can't help thinking that once the pandemic dies down and everything gets back to normal, people are going to go, yeah, fine, all right, whatever, and go back to doing things in the office largely the way they did before. But there'll be fewer people there, and there'll be more of them working from home at least part of the time. Personally, I think that's what's going to happen.
Well, Tsedal, what stands out as you think about that? I mean, Hiawatha gave us a really great rundown just there, and to be sure, a lot of these are existing trends, pre-existing trends. But on the other hand, we also just heard JD point out that some of those existing trends have accelerated 5 years worth. Yeah. We've crammed it into 1 year. So what stands out to you, Tsedal?
I mean, what stands out to me is the sheer scale and magnitude of the people who have participated in remote work in the last year. We're talking about billions of people around the world. There is no doubt that Hiawatha is right. This is not new. Remote work is not new. Hybrid work is not new. But it's newly a dominant feature of people's work. And we've developed fluencies with using digital tools. Who knew what Zoom was? And Microsoft Teams and Slack and you name it, pre-pandemic. They were just supplements. Today, they're lifelines. So I do think, contrary to this view that we just heard, that the world has changed. Individuals have changed. Offices will change forever and ever. And part of the reason is data. When you look at surveys from the Gartner Group to Harvard Business School Online to JLL, commercial real estate folks, the average is around 88% of people surveyed want to retain some form of flexibility in their work. So flexibility is key. People want work, life, flexibility that they've always craved. They thought it should come from work-life balance, which is a fallacy. Now they crave it and they're asking for it. And folks are saying they will quit, according to Bloomberg and others, if they don't have this flexibility and no more commutes. So I think things have changed and changed forever.
Meena, I think there's no doubt we've gotten more flexibility in the past year. I wonder whether we've really gotten more balance, though. I know a lot of folks, and maybe myself included, who feel like it's become harder to unplug in a way because that line between the home and office has become blurred. What have you observed?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. People are working longer hours. There's no doubt about that. I think it's been such an interesting experiment as a designer, kind of looking in at this. I mean, we're at such a pivotal point right now as people are rethinking what hybrid looks like for their office, right? And it used to be that like one size fit all. And now what I think is really wonderful is that independently businesses are putting the mirror up and saying, what is good for my business? And I think that to me is a really great thing, because for a long time, a lot of organizations would follow other organizations. This tech company is doing this, so I'm going to follow that. Or a consumer goods company is behaving this way, I'm going to mimic that environment. And I think what we're seeing in the design world as clients are coming to us, they came to us in the short-term strategy. They were like coming to us and asking us, what should we do now? What does the return to work look like? But what's really been great is seeing the long-term strategy and understanding that their business may act differently than other folks' business. And I think to us, that's exciting because it allows for these businesses to really understand how is the work getting done. And what I think is really fascinating with both of the colleagues on this call is that we're thinking about these organizations in a way that is very much about how is their culture? What does their subculture look like? A lot of organizations that have been outcome-based, they have been able to quickly dive deep into remote working and work well. And other companies have been doing it for years, but it's a huge spectrum to kind of see where organizations are. What I found was really fascinating was how adaptive individuals were. If you look at individual work styles and how people do their work and what kind of work they're doing, it really came down to how individual groups, the tasks they're doing, and we're talking about knowledge workers, right? So the tasks that they're doing and how they're functioning within this kind of virtual environment. And virtual culture exists. We've seen that with a lot of great organizations. But to kind of conclude, just to wrap it up, I really want to say that the biggest thing we've noticed is that focused work can get done at home. The things that people are highly craving is socialization and collaboration. So a lot of companies are really rethinking the one-to-one workstation and looking at it as though, how can I create spaces for people to meet at, to connect at? Some organizations are calling their workplace a club. They want people to come together again. Workplace matters.
Let's get into that a little bit more, because I think it can be helpful to put some concrete ideas to the concepts that we're describing. And I think it's important to acknowledge too that, look, various workspaces are at different phases of reopening. Some really never closed, and others have gone permanently remote. And then somewhere in between are various visions of redesigned office spaces. So Meena, I want to stick with you and ask you to share some of the concepts that you and your firm have been thinking about as far as what new office spaces could look like in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I think it really has come down to a mindset shift. And I think it's really thinking about, a lot of organizations are saying, we're going to come in 3 days a week. So what does that look like? And so we've gone through the exercise of really understanding, if you are coming in 3 days a week, what are the things that you're coming into the office for? And so this kind of mindset shift of thinking about, how are we creating a work environment that supports the things that these independent businesses need in their work environment? So this may be spaces. We've done a couple of studies that are being shown right now where there's spaces that are highly flexible, highly adaptable, and provide a lot of choice. So you can go onto your corporate app and decide you need an 8-person meeting room with a writable surface, with a flat screen for a collective group of people. And being able to have that choice of creating a customized experience for your employee, is what people are really looking for, because they can do their focused work at home. So they're coming into the office to really create an environment with their colleagues, to connect, to create, to collaborate, and they want to be able to make the space that they're using hackable, that they can change it depending on what they're coming into the office for. So we've been seeing a lot of flexible spaces, adaptable spaces, and spaces that the individual has much more control over. The other big piece of this is health and wellness. So I live out in Los Angeles, so it's really very much about spaces that we can work outside. We call them workscapes, right? So they're connected to the footprint of an office, but we can actually be working outside in a fresh air environment where we have control over our thermal comfort, that there's shading devices, that there's power integrated into this outdoor environment that allows for this higher focus of wellness. And the last but not least piece of this is, and we've already talked about it, is the importance that people are coming back to the office to connect with individuals. So are we creating a lot of spaces for these kind of impromptu meetings, the one-on-one meetings, the spaces that are really about connecting and creating those water cooler conversations that we're not having in this Zoom fatigue that we're all dealing with? So if I could just culminate some of the things we're talking about is really being able to customize space types to allow for people to kind of curate them for what they need. And even if the workstation doesn't come back to life, this idea of when you come back to the work environment, you do have a space that's cozy, very much like your home, that, Resi commercial has not left us. It still exists. And I think it will continue to be a level of comfort for the human experience that we're providing within the work environment. That level of human capital, I think it was said before this call, everything that we're doing is very much about a human focus. And so even if you're thinking about a hybrid and a Zoom room in the future, it's about making sure the people on the call and the people that are at home actually feel connected to one another. So we've done a lot of studies at Perkins&Will about, what could these Zoom rooms look like, and make sure that everyone feels included in the process.
Tsedal, I want to ask you a little bit about this sort of hybrid concept, and we have a great question from a viewer on this point. Again, a reminder, if you want to join the conversation tonight, you can submit questions on slido.com and use the hashtag #ThisChangesEverything. And as I'm looking at these renderings, Meena, they look very welcoming. They're the kind of workspaces that would make me want to get out of my home office and go back into a real office. But a lot of folks may be thinking about a hybrid model. And so, Tsedal, we have a viewer who's asking, what is the best way to approach meetings that are half in person and half virtual? How can you engage each meeting participant equally? Do you have any advice on that front? I'm sure that's something that a lot of managers are thinking about right now.
Yes, because by definition, hybrid means that there's a mix between those who are physically present and those who are zooming in. So first and foremost, we have to make sure that we have the right technology in the room, whether it's the conference room with the large screen where you can see who's not there, but also we will need to continue to have our mobile devices with us, because we might have to look into a screen. And so the most important thing here is that leaders need to make sure that they democratize airtime and ensure that everyone can participate fully with the conversation, no matter where they are. Interestingly enough, what we are seeing, some preliminary evidence, is that the people who are in the office are outnumbered compared to the people that are zooming in, and they're struggling to get into a conversation, because if you're on video conference, by the way, I say Zoom, I mean any kind of, it's my proxy for video, and Zoom did endorse my book, so love Zoom, but I mean every video conferencing tool. It brings everyone into a screen. We're all democratized because of that. We have equal access, we can see people. And so those who are present in the room are having a hard time interrupting, joining those who are bonding and connecting in their Zoom spaces. So this is where leadership comes in. This is where norms come in, where you have to have rules of engagement that you explicitly discuss to make sure that everyone is included in the conversation. Another important thing that all of us, I think, have experienced are the second chat channel that is ongoing during most conversations. Today, we want to integrate those into the meeting to make sure that someone can actually say, I actually want to share a point here. Oh, let's bring so-and-so in. So it's the work of a distributed leadership that's really important here. And there's another thing I'll say here is, it's so important that leaders don't begin to have water cooler conversations with those that they are co-located with. That doesn't incorporate others. So leaders have to be very disciplined. People have FOMO to begin with, fear of missing out. You don't want to manifest that through your behaviors before meetings and after meetings as well.
Well, how do you avoid that? I'm unclear on that one. I mean, if the person is not there, the person is not there.
You avoid it by being disciplined and not getting into extra conversation without every member being present. One of the most important things that's so important to understand here is you have to think of this with the same kind of logic as global work or global teams. By definition, global teams cannot be in the same space. We need to bring the behaviors, the best practices, and the discipline that we employ for global work into our domestic work. And that's not new. It takes different set of skills, different mindset to concur with what Meena has said. And people learn very quickly. But they need to learn it.
Hiawatha, there is a sort of related tech question, I think, that goes along with this, and it's a good one from a viewer, and maybe you have some sense of it. The question is, what are ways companies have been getting better communication and interaction from their employees who work remotely and decide not to go into the office? I mean, I think we do lose something in the body language of the interpersonal dynamic.
Right. Well, I'm not sure.
I think is what you were getting at. So are there any tools people are working on right now that are promising in that front?
Well, none that I don't think we're already all familiar with. I think it's not a matter of the tools. We already have tools like Zoom and Skype and of course things like Slack, which enable us to communicate readily with each other. It's not so much that we need new technical tools. We have to figure out the vocabulary that we're going to use for actually making use of those tools. The tools are already there. And how you can do it any better through tech, I'm not really sure that there's anything I could point to and say, yes, this will make it better, because it's going to be visual or it's going to be audio or it's going to be text, and all that stuff is there already. The question is, how do you have that conversation with somebody who's there and at the same time somebody who's not there? And the whole vocabulary, as you were saying, about you have to create this whole new vocabulary of how you communicate, which we've already been in the process of doing for the last year. So I think a lot of these lessons have already been learned. I don't think there's any magic bullet of technology that solves that. It's about developing a vocabulary for communicating with each other in this way, like learning how to talk to somebody on Zoom or Skype as opposed to talking in a face-to-face meeting.
Well, how about robots, though, Hiawatha? I know you like robots, and I can see
robots.
in some of
what have robots got to do with this?
Yeah, I know you like robots, and I can see in some of Meena's renderings. Meena, you have one. It may be sort of a stationary kiosk. It's a little bit hard to tell, but you have a sort of humanoid-looking robot in one of your renderings. I mean, could that be a solution where you have sort of a telepresence, in meetings that makes it feel like you are all sort of sitting around the table more so than just zooming in on a screen?
I missed the robot. I didn't see that, but I don't really see how a robot helps.
What do you think, Meena? I mean, in this design, I mean, is that sort of the vision in a way? I mean, maybe you've been watching TV lately and you've seen this sort of charming commercial. I forget what it's even for. So that showed maybe IBM, but there's a robotic, a boy in school walking down the hallway to ask a girl to the school dance because he's laid up in the hospital. I mean, so is that kind of the future of the workspace?
Well, I think there needs to be a balance between digital technology and analog, right? And I think that's just good for just being human and balancing our brain. And so I do appreciate technology, but I also think there's an aspect of having a high-performing space where the technology is embedded and that you're able to experience it and feel unplugged, even though you are connected to so many different things. And I think ideally, I think that's kind of like in an ideal setting we'd like to get to, that, you know, that the Wi-Fi and the performance and all of our technology tools is working in such a high level, but it's not hindering us from having those one-on-one conversations with individuals, to having the, you know, the connection that we all have been craving as we've been at home. There's a huge aspect of this aspect of really feeling connected to your internalness, especially as individuals have looked at their, especially I would definitely say Generation Z and millennial generation, that's the majority of people in the work environment, is that they're really looking for environments that work with their lifestyle. So I think that we just have to be really cognizant of that aspect of balancing the robot or any other type of technology that may be not as comfortable for many, you know, so finding that right balance between the analog aspects and the digital aspects.
And if I may add to this, you know, the work around digital tools to enable virtual, distributed, hybrid communication and work, not just communication, that set of insights have been around since 1976. And so it's not a matter of this technology or that technology, is how we use them, including using synchronous for some things, asynchronous for others, using lean media like email or Slack that doesn't have all the context and place and emotionality conveyed through it, versus rich media where we need video conferencing and other modes of collaboration and interaction. So we just need to be much more adept at matching the right format of technology for our work objectives. And that's where it all fits. The question of the robot, though, I do think that if we get this hybrid workplace right, if we become much more digitally savvy, including the issues around security that we heard about earlier in the opening, we're preparing for the digital revolution, which is about not just collaborating with Sal or Sally, but AI bot, right? So there is that place we're going to, but today we just need to use digital tools in a way that fits our work objectives.
Right. Of course, the other, you know, the big thing that has come up during this entire transition we're going through is indeed data security, because it is no accident that we have seen this upsurge in things like ransomware and all these attacks, because people, as they move out of the traditional office, are no longer under the security umbrella of the corporate IT guys who are keeping everything safe. And so the moment you go beyond that, you've got this whole raft of problems that arise because people are using their own personal devices. They don't know how to configure them. Nobody set them up properly. Things go kablooey all the time. And that's something that is going to just keep happening. And one of the things you see, despite now having a year of experience with this, there are still organizations that haven't figured this out. How do I secure my employee's phone? How do I secure my employee's laptop? They are not, you know, it's bring your own device. How do I make sure that device is safe? My kids, they got laptops handed to them from school, but and they did a pretty good job. They had everything locked down. You couldn't change anything on those laptops. They were issued by the public school. What do you do if they got tired of using them? They were slow, and they used their own laptops. And fortunately, they didn't get hacked, but that's the problem that's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen. It's already happening, and that problem is going to go on into the future as this kind of thing continues.
It's a great point, Hiawatha, because I think that it will partly dictate how flexible employers are willing to be. We can talk about the office dynamics and can teams work together and all that.
Right.
None of it may matter if companies just put the kibosh on remote work because they feel like it's too much of a cybersecurity risk. So that's
not going to happen.
No, I don't think so.
You don't
There's no kibosh. No, I don't know what kibosh means, but if
they'll put an end to it.
Killing it, I don't think so.
We'll figure out the security aspect enough, though, that companies will feel comfortable. In other words,
I think part of the security issues, I couldn't agree more, because this is what my data shows as well, including the fact that we're downloading stuff left and right, clicking on innocuous phishing emails. But the big thing is we rushed to virtual and remote work without having an integrated security system, and that's made us vulnerable. And so I think this is something that is going to get nipped in the bud eventually when companies experience security problems, not if, when. And people will learn and move forward. It's not going to change the fact that the nature of work has fundamentally changed. The nature of work has fundamentally changed. There's no going back. There's no going back.
I don't know if it's going to happen, but for years I have wondered whether or not home broadband providers might not have to start offering a higher tier of security service, not unlike what you get from a corporation, where if you plug your home computer into the network, they run a series of checks on it to make sure that it's properly secured. I don't know why that hasn't happened yet, because it seems to me something that we should have had a long time ago. You're already seeing a push to get past this whole idea of the asymmetric broadband speeds, where you get very fast downloads but relatively slow uploads. And if you're in a house full of people who are working from home, that can be a problem sometimes. So the broadband providers are saying we're going to speed up the uploads so that will make it easier to work from home. They also need to figure out ways to make the consumer broadband experience more secure, since so many of us are plugging into it. But I don't really hear a lot of action coming from them on that. And I don't know why. I'm wondering if it might be necessary to, lobby them, or maybe even have the government step in and say, you got to do this. I don't know.
Viewers, keep those questions coming on Slido.com. Again, the hashtag is This Changes Everything. We got a good one I want to send to you, Meena. One of the questions is about how we build those sort of interpersonal dynamics when we're working remotely. And so the question is, we used to be able to see our employees working. How do we build trust and feel confident in remote workers? And I'm thinking, Meena, particularly of new remote workers. In some cases, we had the advantage of, we had previously worked together side by side in the office, and then we were thrust into this remote environment, but there was sort of a pre-existing trust that we had built up from in person. But more and more, we'll have new people onboarding who may have never met their colleagues face to face. And I think that's really what this question is getting at. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting question. I think most of the research that we've gathered during this last 15 months was that onboarding was a big issue for a lot of organizations. Bringing new people on during COVID was hard. But what was interesting was companies that had a strong culture and actually had a strong virtual culture were actually able to do that very well. And I think that really comes down to some of, what Tsedal was saying about it starts with leadership, right? How is leadership communicating? How are they kind of creating the culture within the organization? I mean, behaviors within cultures, we're really talking about behaviors, right? And rituals that organizations have. And I think that takes time to build. And what I found really interesting as we did a lot of study on this is that organizations dove deep. We were able to see the companies that had that strong culture already in the workplace turn it to the virtual environment just like that. And some companies actually became stronger through all these virtual teams across the country. So even if their office was acting very siloed during the pandemic, they felt very much connected to their brand and their organization. So I think this idea of being able to see the employee, I think it comes down to this idea of really changing kind of the infrastructure of that organization. It's not where an individual works. The workforce is everywhere. We have digital nomads everywhere. Our biggest worry about is making sure their work environment is just as compatible with the physical work environment, and that there's different things there that support their business, right, and support the individual. So I have to say that this idea of I think there's an internal problem when you don't trust the people you're hiring. So I think there needs to be a little bit more thinking about, it's not about seeing the person, it's about their outcome. And we talked about outcome-based work in the beginning of this, but there may be more internal, and also it's a demographic thing. I've noticed a lot more of the baby boomer generation is really much more comfortable with seeing people, and that's when they believe they're working. But keep in mind that the majority of the workforce is a little bit different, and we need to kind of really be empathetic and understand what people need, and a lot more communication. We talked a lot about this, but that leadership needs to put that lens on and say, we need to really communicate with our team so they feel like, trust. No one can do anything creative if they don't have that trust within their work culture.
Well, and hey, keep in mind those millennials, the oldest ones, born in 1982, they're turning 40 next year, folks. Those millennials aren't kids anymore, so there is a demographic shift happening in our workspace. Tsedal, a viewer has a good follow-up question to your earlier point about there just being no going back once we've experienced the changes in our work culture for the past year plus. And so the question is, does that mean companies will not be able to demand that all workers be in the office? You told us before we came on the air that you thought workers were in a position of strength right now, and I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, because the fact that employers are seeing staggering number of people asking for flexibility in their own companies is pretty compelling. I've worked with a number of organizations that started out with, okay, let's do that survey. First, you survey anonymously. Anonymously is very important because you want real preferences as opposed to job insecurity types of responses. And one particular company, thousands of employees, they found that 3 people said they wanted to come back full time. 1, 2, 3, 3 humans. So they went from we love our pre-pandemic world to we better consider this. So it's not that companies can just demand, and some are, particularly in the financial, in the finance sector, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, they've asked people to come back, but they're going to enter the war for talent unlike any we've ever seen. And I'm quoting Ernst & Young, Steve Krukos, who says to us, the war for talent that we're about to enter is unlike any that we have seen in our entire careers, which means that this flexibility that people are asking for because they now know about it and have also proven productivity can still be maintained, in fact, gone up for most organizations. 70% of organizations will tell you that productivity has gone up since remote work has launched for them, which is not surprising because typically people with autonomy, flexibility, with being able to self-direct their work, their job satisfaction is higher and they perform well. This is evidence that started with Cisco in 1993 when they started to experiment with hybrid and then remote work. And so productivity's gone up. So historical arguments around why we need people back in order to perform, done, gone, kaput. The idea that we can't trust you, gone. You've had to trust us. We've demonstrated that.
Whoa! Now we were talking about that earlier. As not all these guys trust us.
Well, I don't know what's happening in journalism, but the thing, I'm just kidding. But the thing about it is leaders and managers had no choice but to confer trust and let people work because this global deadly virus had us all migrate home and the evidence is clear. So the reason why this is going to be tough for companies who don't participate in this is retention, is hiring the best people. And, do you want your best talented folks to leave and go to the competitors and you end up with those who can accommodate your demands or those who are willing? This is going to be a competitiveness issue.
Please don't think I'm disagreeing with you. I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that a lot of companies out there don't necessarily agree because Huge numbers of companies are basically buying spyware that they're insisting that their employees use in order to track their activities while they're working from home. I was shocked myself because, I mean, I guess because I work at the Globe and nobody does. I think nobody's doing that around here.
You know something? You're right. And in fact, the lovely words or term for this is awareness technologies. They call them awareness technologies. They started selling, went through the roof when COVID started. But let me tell you what happens when people have to be monitored through these awareness technologies. It makes them feel humiliated, and the moment they can, they are leaving. That's what happens.
It sounds
I know. This is what happens. This is what they will tolerate it so long as they need to, and they are gone. There's no future in this.
Meena, let me ask you, this back and forth between Hiawatha and Tsedal is making me wonder about what the prospects are for the future of what was previously a co-working craze, pre-pandemic. I mean, this was the hot trend for a while, and the premise was that people who were maybe freelancers or maybe they were the remote member of a team that was based somewhere else, they wanted so badly to have the in-person experience that they would, or their company would pay some, small monthly fee for them to be in a co-working space. I mean, is that dead? I mean, is that industry just? We already had the spectacular WeWork IPO failure even before.
Right.
What's
dead? No, I mean, I think a lot of companies, large companies, are thinking about a hub and spoke model, right? So they're thinking about the HQ and then other suburban offices, right? And so when they're thinking about that, they're also thinking about taking space in a lot of these WeWork environments. I think that the WeWork environments are supporting a lot of these small organizations, these small startups. A lot of individuals have started their own company, left these large tech companies and started their own. They need spaces for co-working to kind of start their own organization. So I think these co-working spaces, I believe we read something recently that they're rising 13%, these co-working environments, right? And so in the last 6 months, and I think that's kind of telling. I mean, I know we've gone through a whole journey with them, but the idea that you're in an environment where you have all this access to, great technology, a great cup of coffee, and connecting with a network of people, that's very similar to what a lot of organizations are craving back in their workplace. So this idea that we have a lot to learn, I think, as an organization that studies the co-working environments and organizations that have placed co-working within their headquarters, So I think that model has a lot to teach us in the future. And I think it's also going to be a place where a lot of organizations use that as their office space, that they might not by purchasing the real estate, that they'll use co-working spaces for their organizations for the, kind of the suburbia contextual localizing their network within that city or within that area of town.
I guess this goes beyond the scope of this conversation, but it sounds like you're basically redesigning the cities and suburbs of America because, and one of the implications of this is that downtowns as we know them are going to change dramatically because there just aren't going to be that many people in them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole trend within even hospitality environments, right? That they're trying to create WeWork spaces within like a staycation or looking at hotel environments with much more of this aspect of you can, take the space for a couple of days and you have the access to work by the pool and also be able to co-work with colleagues on the lower level. I think a lot of these amenity spaces within multifamily homes will also have this aspect of co-working, So if you are living in a high-rise apartment, what if you could just go downstairs and get this great cup of coffee and work with some of your colleagues? So I definitely believe this idea of co-working, it can be transformed in so many different places. And you're absolutely right. I mean, in the one aspect of being an architect and designer right now, it is a rethink. Yeah. I don't know if many of you have read the book by Adam Grant, but this is a fantastic time to really think about what's important to us and what's important to our cultures and our communities and figure out how do we use some of the spaces that don't seem very valuable right now and how do we convert them or transform them to something really meaningful and purposeful for the people that want to come back down to the cities, right? So it's an exciting time for our organization just to kind of rethink these things.
I don't know.
Tsedal, there are some really interesting. Oh, go ahead, Hiawatha.
No, I was going to say I was more of a question than anything else because I haven't heard anybody talking about the disease. Nobody's talking about COVID and the return and the ways we're going to have to come back into the office and cope with the residual effects of the disease itself. How long do we think about the disease? Do we require people to get tested? Do we require them to have vaccine passports? Are they going to have to regularly prove they're healthy? How long will all that go on? To what extent does that become ingrained as part of the work experience? When does it all go away?
Well, how about this one, Hiawatha? I mean, it sort of as a concrete thing. I mean, especially early in the pandemic, there was this huge emphasis on sterilization and surface cleaning, right? And then we learned, as we learned more about the virus, we learned that it was primarily an airborne virus, right? Primarily transmitted through the air, less so on surfaces, although you could still pick it up that way. But I mean, so what do we make of that then? I mean, will we, when to the extent people do go back, will there be that same emphasis on office cleaning, or will we get lax again?
No, exactly. No, I honestly don't know the answers, but that is exactly what I'm thinking about right there. I wrote about this, the move toward touchless technologies in the office. Well, I think that's not going very far now because it's pretty clear that that's not really the issue anymore. Nobody's going to spend millions of dollars on that. But on the other hand, what about ventilation systems? To what extent are they going to invest in rebuilding them? That really matters. And so are they going to spend a fortune on that? I don't know. How far into the future do offices change the way they operate because of concern about illness? I just can't see this going on once the disease fades out. People are not going to live like we're in a pandemic all the time. So a lot of that stuff, I think, is going to go away.
Tsedal, I wanted to come to you with an interesting question posed by a viewer. And again, the website is slido.com and the hashtag is #ThisChangesEverything if you want to submit a question. The question is, do you think the advancement of remote work will extend the careers of older but experienced knowledge workers? And I like the sports comparison here, sort of like the designated hitter, right? So maybe somebody who can't play the field so well, but is still good at the plate. And I guess to build on that idea, we've heard from
God, I hope so.
Right, exactly. Hey, listen, as I got my grades coming in, I'm with you. But I'm wondering, we've heard from a lot of folks during this pandemic period that not uniformly, but some people say I've experienced less ageism, working remotely. I've experienced less sexism, less racism, fewer microaggressions in the office. I mean, are there things that we can carry over?
I think these are things that we must carry over. You're absolutely right. Those with physical disabilities are saying that they've never felt more included than during the remote environments. Black professionals are saying that microaggressions have gone down so precipitously for them because they don't have to do the cultural code switching that they had to do, or the psychological commute that they had to do, being confused for a colleague, being called so-and-so when you're so-and-so, and the angry Black woman stereotype. Many marginalized groups are saying that their sense of belonging to their organization has strengthened when they were physically more distant and away from office politics as well. So I think we need to take these lessons when we not only design our spaces, but understand what this is doing is fully unmasking the experience of a diverse workforce. And understanding this then suggests that we need to put systems and processes in place where we keep the fantastic and ensure that we drive out through learning all of the ways in which people have felt marginalized historically. The other thing about remote work is that it allows us to increase our diversity, our numerical diversity goals, because we can hire people from many more places. The pipeline problem that we often hear about, well, we have so many more pipes now, and we don't need to ask people to leave their communities and their support structure and apparatus wherever they live and tell them to come to a new city to join our companies. They can stay where they are and still contribute. So we can increase our diversity and capitalize on the inclusion experiences that we're learning about. The thing not to do, though, is to say all Black people be remote. That would be disaster, right?
Well, I was just going to ask.
Learn.
It would be disappointing if the lesson was just like, oh, work remote and that'll solve the problem, right? How do we take these lessons into the in-person workspace, right? Because the lesson can't just be everybody stay on your computer.
That's exactly right. I'm so glad you said that. That's what this means. You know, we need to put systems in place that allows us to leverage all the learnings and to ensure that people feel included, whether they're in person or not in person, and grow our diversity numbers. Everywhere I go, we want to be more diverse. Well, now you can.
Very good point.
Meena, another sort of workplace culture question I've been thinking about. Maybe this is just because I love carbs, but I've been missing in WBUR's, in the old days in the newsroom, we had Bagel Fridays. We'd get together around the table. Everybody would pick through the same bag. We'd spread the cream cheese out of a communal container. Yeah, I mean, is that dead? I mean, is that just not, are people just going to be way more hygiene conscious? And I raise that sort of in jest, but to make a serious point, which is what might be the implications on environmental and green initiatives in workspaces, right? If now everybody's food is prepackaged in its own isolated little thing and there's no shared touching of anything, we're going to generate a lot of plastic waste. I mean, there are tangible side effects that go with that. I'm wondering how you're thinking about that as a designer of workplaces.
Yeah, no, we built out a space during the pandemic, and I think that was like one of their major drivers was everything that anything that they're getting delivered has to be independently wrapped. We had to do a touchless sink and soap dispenser in the environments, like all of this huge consciousness about the idea that the goldfish cracker bowl is no longer going to exist in the middle of the cafe space, right? And so, I mean, in general, I think, food brings people together. And I think that there is an aspect of, eating with your colleagues, coming together in the work environment, eating together. I think people are definitely, it's very hard to tell right now, where is that rubber band live? But the aspect that we're going to be much more conscious about things we're touching and things we're feeling and shared food. I mean, that's kind of like, what we've learned through this. I think people are generally conscious, like they're not going to come to work sick coughing anymore. I think there's a conversation of like, you get very nervous when you hear people coughing on an airplane, right? So I think there's this awareness that we all have built in us. And, the fact that there's a lot of things in our headspace that we don't even know is going to affect us when we go back to the environment, right? Or back into a work environment, a more collaborative environments, and going into a concert where there's, thousands of people, there's just, there's things that are affecting us right now that we can't even probably fathom, the kind of mental stress that we all go through and what we're going to be experiencing in the future. But just coming down to the food in the workplace, I think right now the organizations and programs and people we're talking to, they're still in kind of that stage where they're limiting that kind of communal food aspects, right? Do I think it'll change? At this point, I don't know. But to talk about health and wellness, I think is so important. This idea of focusing on nutrition, hydration, active design, that, you're creating a workplace where you have working meetings. Some of the most wonderful things that have happened as we're working from home is that we're walking our dog and we may be having earbuds on and we're talking to our colleagues and we're outside, right? So there is this huge aspect of taking care of ourselves so that we can be the most insightful for our businesses and the most, healthy self-love for ourselves. And self-love comes from our head as well as our body. So I think I emphasized this before, but just creating a lot of comfort in the work environment. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot of that could be done with materiality. It has to do with circadian lighting that we're proposing in work environments where it really does feel like you're not, when you step inside a conditioned space versus an outside space, how is the lighting helping your body, right? So this aspect of personal wellness is a big push that, and definitely plant programs, green programs, having access to a lot of natural light, all of these things are just elevating in this aspect of living design in our world.
Meena, I'm glad you mentioned a moment ago the idea of just staying home when you're sick. I feel like I should point out that having that choice, having paid sick leave, is a privilege that not everybody enjoys, but many office workers do. And so I wonder about that. I wonder, Hiawatha, if you agree, do you think that we have seen a real cultural shift in which we'll get away from this, tough it out when you're under the weather mentality that many office workers do? Do you buy that, or do you think
I'm hardly an expert on that, but I would hope we have, because now we've seen this proven flexibility that allows the worker to get the job done without having to come in and possibly infect other people. So that excuse for showing up anyway seems to have faded away. But of course, it's going to depend on the workplace, and it's going to depend on the work environment. This is where this whole question of whether or not workers have real power is really going to come in, because on the other hand, who knows, maybe there will be more sensitive employers who, without having to be nudged by workers, will themselves say, look, we want to be safe. Don't come up in here if you're not feeling sick. And that could happen as well. But we just don't know at this point. We'll have to see how it shakes out.
Yeah.
Well, we still have, go ahead, Tsedal.
I was just going to say, what we do know is in the last 15 months, companies report that absenteeism has gone down precipitously, right? With remote work, where people are somehow healthier, they're showing up, but absenteeism has gone down, which is interesting. And so the hope is that people can use working from home to keep others healthy, which I have to believe is the case, given the lessons of the last 15 months or so.
I think we got time for one more submitted question from Slido. And again, viewers, thank you so much for being such active participants tonight. We've gotten to many of your questions. I'm sorry we haven't gotten to all of them. But Meena, this is a good one, I think, to get at toward the end. The question is, how do you control possible resentment between the people working from home and people who have to come into the office? And we've touched on this a little bit, but I think it's such a good summation of what we're headed to. If we're headed toward a hybrid workplace, how do we make sure that it's a happy workplace where people who are not working alongside each other are feeling like colleagues, which is what they are, but feeling that collegiality instead of resentment?
Uh-oh, Mike is muted.
Okay, I have to buy a t-shirt that says I'm on mute, because I think it's yes. Every day, once a day. I apologize.
And we made it almost through the whole hour without it happening, so that was pretty good. But please,
it had to. Yeah. Thank you, Hiawatha. So I think it has a lot to do with what Tsedal was mentioning about this aspect of really thinking about that FOMO aspect, and really making sure that the people have this mindset. If you're having a conversation that involves your whole team and your team's not there, let me get them on the phone. Let me, have technology access so that I can bring them up on a screen. So making sure that we change our mindset to make sure that we're inclusive, that we're including the people that need to be involved, and that we're very cognizant of it. I think there has been this effort, to be much more connected to our employees. It's so fascinating for me to see someone's husband or partner walk across the ways. I get to meet them. Their cat is walking across the keyboard. I get to meet their animals. Like, we have such a more compassion and empathy, and I think that is one thing I am thankful for. Maybe it is our silver lining, but we need to bring that silver lining back into the work environment to make sure people aren't there, that we're making sure that they feel included in our conversations, that we're communicating on such high levels. It's our duty as individuals, as leaders of organizations, to take that upon ourselves. So I do state that as just, making sure that we're continually to create this environment that includes everyone.
Yeah, but what about the people who are there who don't want to be, the ones who have to come in and who say, I'd rather be at home? How do you satisfy them?
It's such a good question. It's going to be ongoing. We have a couple minutes, just 1 minute to go, but go ahead, Meena.
No, I think it's a rethink. I think these organizations that are controlling the employee that way, those employees won't stick around. There's too much competition. Where there's companies that are able to really help individuals manage their own time, to respect managing their own time, self-managing, I think is very important. And like, those are the organizations that will prevail. And I don't think the ones that are controlling people or don't give that autonomy, I think they will suffer.
All right. Your mouth to the globe's ears. All right.
It's really well put, Meena. And of course, you were making me think, although you're not seeing, I haven't had any break-ins into my office during this call, but I am very thankful for my wife right now, who is handling our 4 little ones and our pandemic puppy.
You got
make sure that
4
they
kids
stay.
now?
Yeah, it's been a busy pandemic. So yeah, but you're right. We've seen a lot more of the family life coming through, and that's been really nice. And I appreciate. I'm sure that you've all given up some family time to spend the evening or part of the evening with us. So thank you for doing that. Again, our panelists tonight, Tsedal Neeley, Meena Krenek, and Hiawatha Bray. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us tonight. Thank you also to Code 42, our sponsor for tonight. And I want to just mention as well that This Changes Everything will return in September with conversations about how society is going to approach education, politics, cuisine, media, sports, health, wildlife, racial justice, and more in the post-pandemic world. So sign up for the WBUR events newsletter to be the first to register for more events in the series. The link is in the chat and the video description. Thank you all for spending part of your evening with us, and we hope to talk with you again soon.